محمد وآل الطاهرين. حبب إلي من دنياكم ثلاث: النساء، الطيب، وجعل قرة عيني الصلاة. This is a noble tradition from the Holy Messenger, and the Urafa have extrapolated lots of delicate points from this tradition. Made love to me, that which has been made for me to like and have an affinity towards from this world of yours, are three things. An-Nisa, women, At-Tib, aroma, and Salat has been assigned as the light of my eyes. Before giving you a commentary of this tradition, it's interesting that the term Nisa, what does it mean? Okay, it's translated as women, but as I've tried to establish during the last few nights, we have to look at the essential spirit of the meaning of the word, that core meaning, essential meaning. And here Nisa comes from Nasi'a. It means delaying. And this form of delayed payment we have in transactions, where you buy something and then over a number of installments you pay over time. They call it delayed payments. That in Arabic is called nasi'a. It comes from the same core. Now, why should women be labeled with this name? Here the Urafa have written incredible literature, and many of these things aren't even published. They sort of is conveyed from mentor to student and so on and so forth, and maybe it shouldn't be published, some of the things that they have to say. For example, there are 20 or 30 reasons why women are called Nisa. They've brought the reasonings. And it's all to do with why are they termed with this term of delaying. One of them is that a woman delays in her beauty to be manifested to others. She doesn't do it. She preserves herself. And therefore, those who very easily manifest themselves and adorn themselves in front of others who are non-mahram, the ultimate example being, for example, prostitutes and so on and so forth, they are not Nisa in the true meaning. They're not women, because they're not delaying this aspect. And there are many other reasons that they've given. Some of them are easy to digest. Some of them are a bit more difficult. Not that they're false or anything, but whether people can digest it or not, that's another matter. In this tradition, the term Nisa is used. And women here are used horizontal to Salat. There's no hierarchy in this tradition. It doesn't say first is this, second is this, and third, my third favorite is this. We don't understand any hierarchical structure in this tradition. There's no proof for that. And when there's no proof, therefore we can conclude relatively safely that these three are horizontal to one another. Now, We have salat on one end, we have women on one end. But the prima facie apparent meaning is that they're horizontal to one another. If that's the case, we have to redefine women. Just because you may see women as an animalistic creature or a fiqhi being alone, and then you get confused with this tradition, that's another issue. But here the ulama, since they see women being used horizontal to salat, they see these two on a par with one another. And therefore, if salat is celestial, so are women. If salat leads to your mi'raj, so can women. And Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi has mentioned and defined women and spoke about women in this light. When he says the salvation of every being in society, the salvation or the happiness or wretchedness of a society depends on the woman. Salvation of every individual being is nurtured in the laps of the woman, and so on and so forth. These are important. Now I want to go through a certain passage from Ibn Arabi in his Futuhat, volume 3, page 250. من عرف مقدار النساء ومنزلتهن في الوجود ولهذا حببهن الله لمحمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فإنه من أسرار الاختصاص. One who understands the extent and station and status of women in the system of existence, and it's because of this status that they have been made to love for the Holy Messenger. And this is one of the secrets of ikhtisas, allocation, referring to that tripartite tradition with the three things which the Holy Messenger likes in this world, or had three things which have been made upon the Messenger to love. وَلَمَّا عَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى قَدْرَ هَذَا, when Allah taught Nabi Musa alayhi salam this status, استأجر نفسه في مهر امرأة 10 سنين. It was then that he hired out his soul, his self, for the dowry of a woman for 10 years. He worked. He hired himself out for Nabi Shu'aib alayhi salam. For 10 years he was ready to do it. And that's why men are a manifestation of this attribute of al-qawi. Qawi, that strong strength. They have to work. That's what the woman wants to see in a man, is that working aspect. And through this al-qawi attribute, she recalls Allah more and more. And the more she doesn't see this, the more she'll be distanced, the more she'll be suppressed in her suluk, in her wayfaring towards Allah. Then he continues, I'm missing one or two sentences out. He says, so here, the point is, in that tradition, the woman, both her external features and her internal features, have to be looked at. Whoever looks at the woman superficially without attentiveness to the batini aspects of her, they're losing out. And whoever looks at the batini aspects alone, being inattentive to the superficial aspects, that is also detrimental. Ibn Arabi then says, فَإِنَّ النَّذَرَ الْعَقْلِي لَا يُعْطِي ذَلِكَ لِبُعْدِهِ عن الشهوة الطبيعية وما علم هذا العقل أنه ما تنزه عن الشهوة لطبيعة الحيوانية في زعمه إلا بالشهوة الطبيعية. It's a very delicate point, this. It says that the theoretical intellect can't grasp this. Can't grasp this idea of looking at the woman and how high her status is by her external and internal features. Because when you want to appreciate the status, there has to be an affinity. You need shahwa to appreciate and acknowledge the woman. Shahwa, that those passions of the individual, is a faculty of the soul. Everyone has shahwa. Here Ibn Arabi says you need shahwa to appreciate the status, the elevated status of the woman. Now, theoretical intellect, pure aql, since it's distanced from shahwa, if you want to use intellect alone, you may not appreciate the status of the woman because it's distanced from the shahwa. And actually the intellect, according to Ibn Arabi, he says what it thinks, that which it acknowledges, is that in order to be distanced from that animalistic shahwa, which is a barrier for the individual, one has to eliminate all traces of the natural shahwa. Shahwa is a faculty of the soul. It isn't a bad thing. It's part of the fitrah. It's one's affinity to things, be it food, knowledge, and other things, not only animalistic things. Food, women, clothing, sleeping, and also things like knowledge, entertainment, and so on and so forth, in the broad sense. It's the shahwa which takes you there. Now, if you believe you want to be distanced from the animalistic shahwa, which is only those, for example, the sexual appetite, the eating appetite, it says that you have to eliminate one's intellect understands it in this way. If it's used, that theoretical intellect. He says, in order to get rid of that, you have to get rid of and eliminate all traces of natural shahwa. And this, he says, وَهَذَا أَجْهَلُ الْجَاهِلِينَ. It's the most ignorant of forms of ignorance. Because he says you need shahwa. And that's why those forms of, those cults or religions that focus on suppressing the shahwa aspects of the individual, there may be some benefit into it. There may be some benefit. It's not the Islamic way though. Islam doesn't necessarily say it's haram, but Islam has a more perfect way of reaching perfection, and it's done using the aql, intellect, and also one's faculties of the soul, including shahwa. That which is interesting here is in the question of homosexuality. The verse in the Qur'an, chapter 7, verse 8, says, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ شَهْوَةً. You are coming forth upon men shahwatan, shahwat-wise. You're approaching men min dunin nisa, not women. This shows that shahwa isn't a bad thing, but you'd have to do it with women. See, it has to be done with women. Now, in the external narrative, historical narrative to the story is in relation to Nabi Lut alayhi salam. And shahwa here is in the sexual sense, no problem. But when you want to look at the batini aspect, and we said the batini stories of the Qur'an, the batini dimensions, knows of no time, knows of no place, and they're indicating the manner of wayfaring and the status quo of the wayfarer. Here, suddenly the picture, in the batini sense of this verse, is a wayfarer to Allah. You approach men in the realm of shahwa. Now use shahwa in the absolute sense here, and not women. So in sleeping, eating, entertainment, knowledge, political activities, and all these things where you need the faculty of shahwa, men have to be doing it with women. And that's how society grows. And that's why Imam Khomeini rahmatullah would say that they have to work side by side in society for the happiness of that society. This is an Arif speaking. Now you imagine that men do these things only with men. Even in entertainment, for example, a man has a wife and he keeps on going out with his male friends. He keeps on visiting them. See, this is a form of shahwa, and they're doing it min dun nisa, when you look at it in the absolute sense. If this wasn't recorded, I would have opened a few, shed more light on here, but I don't. It's a bit sensitive material now. But this is important. It's an important lesson. You shouldn't do it min dunin nisa. Bal antum qawmun musrifun. In the botany sense, this would mean thus: that look, you in shahwa in the absolute sense, instead of executing it side by side with women, with your wife, for example, and so on and so forth, you're doing it always with men. This status of yours is that of a musrif, one who is living and wasting oneself, doing israf. You're wasting yourself when you're doing this. And so a look towards women minus shahwa is not acceptable. Then Ibn Arabi continues, وَلَوْ لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ شَرَفِ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا هَيْئَةِ السُّجُودِ لَهُنَّ عِنْدَ النِّكَاحِ. If it wasn't for, or rather, if the only thing which indicates, if, this is an impossible if, there are many things, but he's saying if the only thing which indicates the high status of women was their posture of sujood during nikah, during intercourse. If this was the only thing which indicates the high status of women, then in brackets he says, وَالسُّجُودُ أَشْرَفُ حَالَاتٍ لِلْعَبْدِ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. And sujood is, this is in between hyphens now, he's just going on the margin. He's saying sujood in salat is the most elevated state for the servant when he goes into sajdah. وَلَوْلَا, so but before he would say, he said, if the only thing which would indicate the high status of women was their position of sajdah during nikah, and then in salat it's the highest state for the servant. He's saying this. Then he says, وَلَوْلَا خَوْفِي أَنْ أُثِيرَ الشَّهْوَةَ فِي نُفُوسِ السَّامِعِينَ. And if it wasn't for my fear that what I have to say about this one point, I mean, there are many things which indicate the high status of women, but if there was only this one thing which proves the high status of women, okay, but it's not. But let's say it was low. It's the impossible if. If this was the only thing, and if it weren't for my fear that I would stimulate, enhance the shahwa of the souls of the listeners of what I have to say on this issue. فيؤدي ذلك إلى أمور يكون فيها حجاب الخلق أما دعاهم الحق إليه. And my saying this, if it wasn't for my saying this leading to a number of issues which would veil and put a veil upon the hearts of these people. Veil against what? That which Allah is calling them towards. Why is it veiling them towards that which Allah is calling them towards? لِجَهْلِهِمْ. Because of people's ignorance. Because of their ignorance. And this ignorance is prevalent today, especially in the East. The finest of customs, the finest of esoteric traditions were born from the East, emanated from the East. You see it slowly drifting to the West, and the West becoming more accessible and more understanding towards it, and in the East becoming more intolerant towards it. It's a contradiction in terms. لِجَهْلِهِمْ, because of their ignorance. Ignorance towards what? بِمَا كُنْتُ أَذْكُرُهُ فِي ذَلِكَ. In relation to that which I have to say on this matter. Their ignorance. I want to say something, but I can't. If it was the only thing which would prove the high status of women though, and if it wasn't for this fear of mine, how these ignorant people were treated, لَأَذْهَرْتُ, I would most certainly have expressed it, that high status. And before that he says, وَلَكِنْ لَهُ مَوَاطِنُ يَسْتَعْمِلُ فِيهَا. He says, and therefore these things should only be said in specific locations. But anyway, I would most certainly have expressed it. مِنْ ذَلِكَ مَا لَا يَظْهَرُ عَلَى فَضْلِهِ فَضْلُ الشَّيْءٍ. And that which I would have certainly expressed is the virtue of this one deed. That one deed which indicates the high status of women, the virtue of it, a virtue which no other virtue can reach it in the Sharia. So these are important matters. They had reached certain truths, but because of the jahl of society, no, these were always kept concealed. They were always kept on the side. Only on this issue, I've only seen one scholar give a commentary. Then he says, وَلَوْ نَذَرْتَ فِي مَا أَنْتَجَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْكَلَامِ الْإِلَهِي لِمُوسَى حِينَ خَرَجَ سَائِيًا لِأَهْلِهِ. لما كانوا يحتاجون إليه من النار. He says, if you see that which Allah produced of divine words that Allah produced to Nabi Musa, it happened when حين خرج سائيا لأهله, when he left to endeavor, سائيا, سعي, to endeavor for his family, when they needed fire, because they were traveling, it was cold, she was almost in labor, pregnant, it was night, it was the winter. Nabi Musa was striving to find fire for the family. فَبِسَعْيِهِ, by means of this endeavoring of Nabi Musa, عَلَى عَيَالِهِ, for the family, وَاسْتِفْرَاغِهِ, and his emptying himself out for the family, really endeavoring here. نَادَاهُ الْحَقِّ وَكَلَّمَهُ, truth, Allah called out to him and spoke with him. Now Ibn Arabi here, first he was speaking of Nabi Musa, after appreciating the status of women, he hired his soul out for 10 years. Here he's saying after endeavoring, again for the woman, it was after this endeavoring, through the woman, Allah is now speaking with him. So that incident on the mountain, it had preliminaries, of which one important aspect was his suluk towards Allah through the woman. Salaam alaikum. And then Allah spoke with him. How did Allah speak with him? In which medium did Allah choose to speak? في أين حاجته وهي النار. Allah communicated and spoke with him through the medium which was tantamount to that need which he had, and that was fire. He was looking for fire for his wife. And since he was sincerely endeavoring for the wife, why was he sincerely endeavoring for his wife? Because he saw the woman's status, he appreciated it, Allah taught him that status. When one knows that status, one endeavors for one's wife. Even if the wife is not practicing, it doesn't matter. You have to see that status in the woman, those attributes which we spoke about yesterday. And one endeavors, because those attributes make one recall Allah constantly. And then Nabi Musa alayhi salam, yes, through fire. That vision of his, the start of his prophethood, occurred through that which he was endeavoring towards for his wife. Then Ibn Arabi gives a story of his own. The Urafa, in relation to the question, can women be a spiritual mentor for men? Is that allowed? Is that okay? They say yes, there's no problem whatsoever. Why should there be? Because it's all about spirituality, teaching divine knowledge. Divine knowledge isn't limited to men. There's no bias here. There's no preference here. According to the logic of the verses of the Qur'an, whenever it comes to spirituality and one's access to perfection, men and women are always used side by side. And therefore, whatever the man can acquire perfection-wise and spirituality-wise, so can women. I don't want to go through all those verses, but it always says, min dhakarin aw untha, in relation to Iman, in relation to all attributes of perfection. It says, min dhakarin o untha, min dhakarin o untha. And therefore when a woman has that and the man doesn't, the woman teaches it to the man. What's the problem there? Many people have an issue. With the Urafo, it's not an issue. Ibn Arabi himself had a lot of female mentors. He had 300 mentors altogether over his lifespan. And not 300, teachers, lecturers or mentors. True spiritual mentors who would be inspired with divine knowledge, who walked the path of Allah. Many of them were women. When I was researching this originally, it's very easy to research these days because of the software. And alhamdulillah, Futuhat is, you can find it on software. With the research I did, I only was able to find 4 references in his Futuhat, because Futuhat is his major work, that magnum opus, so to speak, as they say, or something like that. I found 4 references of female mentors. In Arabic, Murshida or Waliya. And there may be other, but anyway, they were mentors. And then one of them, it gives a very interesting story, which I want to share with you. How much time do we have? I just want to know.
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay, that's enough time. وخدمت أنا بنفسي امرأة من المحبات العارفات. I paid services to. I was at the service of a woman who was one of the lovers of Allah, one of the Urafa. Bishbiliya, residing in a city in Spain called Ishbiliya. يقال لها فاطمة بنت ابن المثنى القرطبي, and her name was Fatima. خدمتها سنين وهي تزيد في وقت خدمتي إياها على 95 سنة. And during that time I was paying services to her, she was more than 95 years of age. Age isn't a prerequisite in spirituality. During the time Ibn Arabi was her student, she was over 95 years of age. وَكُنْتُ أَسْتَحِي أَنْ أَنْظُرَ إِلَى وَجْهِهَا. Assalamu alaikum. And I was embarrassed at looking at her face. I had haya, modesty, at looking towards her face. وَهِيَ فِي هَذَا السِّنِّ مِنْ حُمْرَةِ خَدَّيْهَا. At this age of hers, though, even though it was over 95, she had rosy cheeks. And I would be embarrassed at looking at her. وَحُسْنِ نِعْمَتِهَا, and a very good complexion, nice complexion. وَجَمَالُهَا تَحْسَبُهَا بِنْتَ 14 سَنَةٍ مِنْ نِعْمَتِهَا وَلِطَافَتِهَا. And her delicate, soft complexion, you would think that she was of 14 years of age. 14 in the Arab tradition or the Islamic tradition is on a par with how in the West they say, for example in America, sweet 16. In the language of Islam it was 14. The same meaning is there. Now look, when someone sees a 95-year-old as 14 with a nice complexion and rosy cheeks and is embarrassed at looking at her, look, this teaches us something were we to see a 95-year-old, we would groan. She looks like this, she speaks like that, she smells like this, her skin is like that. That's all we see. The superficial, the dhahir. He only sees light. In this very 95-year-old, he only sees the batini, the good aspects. Even in those wrinkled whatever, he's seeing the good of that. And this is a status that he's having. Because of this status, this having this befitting worth, does a woman allow such a person to be her student? Yes, even today they exist. But they're so concealed because of the ignorance of people. It's in very concealed circles. They would never allow it to come out. And therefore when they choose someone, they have to really, that someone has to go through a lot of preliminaries. وَكَانَ لَهَا حَالٌ مَعَ اللَّهِ. She had states before Allah, with Allah, spiritual states. وَكَانَتْ تُؤْثِرُنِي عَلَى كُلِّ مَنْ يَخْدِمُهَا مِنْ أَمْثَالِي وَتَقُولُ مَا رَأَيْتُ مِثْلَ فُلَانٍ. And amongst people like me who would serve her, she would prefer me over others. She had a particular liking towards me and would say that I've never seen someone like him. So here Ibn Arabi is speaking about himself a bit, and he goes a bit on that issue, which I don't want to waste time too much on speaking about that. Then he says, وَسَمِعْتُهَا تَقُولُ. Once I heard her say, عَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ يَقُولُ إِنَّهُ يُحِبُّ اللَّهِ وَلَا يَفْرَحُ بِهِ وَهُوَ مَشْهُودُهُ عَيْنُهُ إِلَيْهِ نَاظِرَةٌ. I'm at surprise. I'm perplexed at one who says they love Allah, but they're not happy with Allah, when they are always perceived and acknowledged by Allah, and Allah is always seeing them. And these people claim that they are lovers of Allah, but they're never happy. They're not happy with Allah. How can they not be happy? I'm perplexed. I'm perplexed why they're not happy. Why shouldn't they be happy when Allah is seeing them? He's content. عينه إليه ناظرة في كل عين لا يغيب عنه طرفة عين. Not for a blink of an eye are they concealed from Allah. Allah is always seeing them moment to moment. They claim to be lovers of Allah. They claim to be amongst the urafa. So why aren't they happy just because a bereavement arises, a problem, a worldly problem arises, but they're still not happy? How can they not be happy when they know Allah is seeing them moment to moment, in the presence of Allah? I'm surprised, I'm perplexed. فَهَؤُلَاءِ الْبَكَّاءُونَ كَيْفَ يَدَّعُونَ مَحَبَّتَهُ وَيَبْكُونَ. How can they claim their love of Allah when they cry and groan in relation to these problems? It's a contradiction in terms. They have to be happy even in the face of problems, bereavements, issues, losses. These are in relation to worldly things. Sometimes in relation to being distanced from spiritual things. Yes. Here crying is of the positive form of sorrow. Or sometimes expression of sorrow is on a par with one's fitra. one should never suppress one's fitra. It's part of one's nature. That's okay. But just because of worldly issues, especially when you know Allah is looking over you, here this is problematic. ثم تقول لي يا ولدي ما تقول فيما أقول. She said, "O son, what do you have to say in relation to that which I've said?" فأقول لها يا أمي القول قولك. And I said, "Mother," referring to the spiritual mother, what your word is your word, and that's the truth. Then Ibn Arabi now recounts another high attribute of this spiritual mentor of his, and says, قالت, she once said, إني والله متعجبة. I think because of limited time here, I'll just go through because I'll keep on missing sentences, and I don't really do that, but I'll just go through the English and just give a translation of this account. Here he says that this woman was very surprised because Fatihatul Kitab, the first chapter of the Qur'an, would serve her. See? Fatihatul Kitab would serve her, be at her service. And she thought Fatihatul Kitab was at the service of everyone. And so she was always bewildered as to why aren't people benefiting from chapter 1 of the Holy Qur'an. Now actually we have traditions where the Qur'an manifests as a human in the hereafter. So these things are on a par with traditions. Verses, chapters of the Qur'an, they can be embodied. Not necessarily as a physical embodiment, but they can be embodied as a barzakhi reality and a vision. Then he recounts that once they were sitting and the teacher was speaking, a woman entered the assembly. The woman said looked at Ibn Arabi and said, "I have a question. My husband is in X city, and I've been informed that he's married there in that city, and I want him to come back." Ibn Arabi looked at the mentor. The mentor said, "What do you want from me, son?" Ibn Arabi said, "The woman wants this husband of his to return. Can you do anything?" The mentor said, "What do you want, son?" He said, "I also want the husband to return." Then she called upon Fatihatul Kitab by reading it. And as she was reading it, she generated a barzakhi embodiment, human embodiment of Fatihatul Kitab, and then spoke to it and said, "Go to X city and bring that man back." And the man was brought, and the wife was very happy. When this happened, the mentor played the tambourine. Although the Arabic is daf, it's a musical instrument. I think it's the tambourine, I'm not sure. The thing with the tambourine is it just has these metallic things which has a clinging noise, ringing noise. But with daf, it looks like the tambourine, but doesn't have that. Yes. Then the woman started playing it. The mentor started playing it and expressed her happiness. Ibn Arabi said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm celebrating." For what? I'm celebrating because Allah has seen me worthy to be one of His disciples, awliya. Awliya is one who is in proximity with Allah. And this, having Fatihatul Kitab be at her service, it shows that Allah has accepted me as a disciple. It's a sign. And then the woman said, she said, I swear by the honor of my companion, referring to Allah, that he has expressed a ghayra, a zeal towards me that I can't describe. The consequences of which is this, that whenever I become attentive to other than Allah, even if it's done neglectfully and through me being oblivious, even if it's done by neglect and heedlessness, right then I am a recipient of extreme burdens. I become burdened. And burdens are a root of spiritual refinement. And she sees this as a blessing. And she sees this as Allah's zeal. Remember, when Allah seals your heart, He doesn't accept interference from other one else. Wallahu ghayur. He's the dislodger. He'll dislodge everyone else if He seals your heart. And in that state, if you become attentive to something else other than Allah, you become burdened. So these are important states, and he speaks considerably about it, and then he ends by saying that I even built her a house out of straw on a par with her size, and she lived in that house until the end of her life. And yes, so these things are, this having a spiritual mentor, even if it's female, it's important, and one benefits from it. It's all about acknowledging her status. Sorry, you acknowledge her status, you'll benefit from them. The lesser you acknowledge that status, the lesser you will benefit. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله.
Salamat.